My name is T.R. Napper. I'm a science fiction writer from, as you can probably tell, Australia. Um, and I write, for the most part, cyberpunk. So near future, very dark science fiction set in different parts of Southeast Asia and Australia. Uh, I do that because I lived in, well, aside from being Australian, I lived in Southeast Asia for about a decade, working in humanitarian aid. I've written one um, tie novel to the Aliens universe. So I was asked to write for that franchise, which was cool. But for the most part, I focus on my own work.
Mhm.
Um, and it's critically it's done well. It's won a few awards and so forth, which is always nice.
Yeah.
I've won three Aurealis awards, but and I had two books come out this year, and that's one of the reasons I ran into Emily is it was at Canberra Comic Con, or I've done so many things this year.
Sydney,
Sydney, sorry,
Sydney Comic
Sydney,
Con, yeah.
Port Sydney. Um, yeah, got two books out this year, a novella and a novel, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But that's how I ran into Emily. Is that Emily was at one of these giant pop cultural conventions, and I was there.
I had heard you talk about your book at another Supernova as well. I went down to Melbourne as well, so it was interesting to hear both you talk about your books.
Yeah, they do sort of blur together after a while, all those cons, but and you
They keep
sometimes want
happening.
and you sometimes wonder why you're doing it, but then you meet a whole bunch of readers and it's really cool. That's why you do it.
Yes. What drew you to writing in the first place?
What drew me? I don't really have a good answer, Emily. As I said in the introduction, I was an aid worker, so I did that for 10 years uh and thought I was going to do that forever. But I was living in Vietnam about 10 or 12 years ago, and I was taking a little bit of time off from my career. I was a little bit burnt out, I suspect. Um, and my son, I was primary carer for my son, who was 12 months old at the time, and started writing. I just had this urge. I thought, oh, I'll try short stories.
Yeah.
Um, well, short stories and novels, but I did have a very spectacularly failed novel at the very start. But so then I threw myself into short stories and gave myself 3 years. So I was living in Vietnam for 3 years, and I said to myself, if I go okay, if I'm not terrible, and maybe publish something, I'll keep going after the 3 years. And I published a few things, and then I got the more than the bug, the obsession with writing to the point where it's almost you wouldn't quite call it an illness. But I certainly, if I'm not writing, I don't feel very good. So I guess I developed that writing obsession, and so changed careers, which is a fairly radical change from aid worker to science fiction writer. But that's the one I did.
Sort of get lets your creativity flow as well, and you sort of in charge of your own world as well.
Well, that's the truth, and it was so liberating. I really loved my that previous work I did, or I should say, proud of the previous work I did. But the creative liberation with becoming a writer, and really and being able to put anything on the page
Yeah.
is simultaneously exciting and quite terrifying because you're the master of it all in a way, and you're the master of your own destiny as a writer, which is which was quite thrilling when you think about it, but also when you if you have your failures, they're 100% yours as well.
Sort of daunting as well because you do build the worlds and the characters yourself. It's even if it's based on loosely on something, it's still yours that you've created, and you sort of have all the background in your head as well for the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't have all the background in my head. Well, I mean, I have the background. I built my world slowly through short stories. I'm kind of a perfectionist when it comes to world building. And again, I'm a bit of an obsessive. So it's really super important for me for it to be logical, internally logical, and to feel lived in for the reader and immersive. And so, yeah, I started with short stories. I didn't, again, I started with a failed novel. Quickly realized I needed to improve my craft. But through short stories, aside from sort of turbocharging my craft, it allowed me to explore a little piece of the world at a time. And so that kind of built it brick by brick by brick. So when I got to the novels, it felt immersive and lived in. But it's not just keeping it in my head, because I say that because as I look around my desk, there is plastered on my walls the latest work in progress.
Yeah,
Characters. I happen to be doing a fantasy novel at the moment, but characters, magic system, flora and fauna, geography, uh, language conventions, etc., etc. I put it on all
yeah,
my walls, and I kind of live it in a way. But also because a novel is pretty much impossible to keep in your head in a way
yeah.
as an author. There's so many characters, so many strands, so many details. That I know people have different methods, but I do like to surround myself in the world that I'm writing in.
I think if the best way would be so not sort of learn your world first, because then how is your characters going to experience it as well? And that sort of helps you build your characters as well, I guess. When you if you know your world, you know the characters that sort of fit and how that you can change your characters along their journey in the world.
Yeah, and that was why I kind of did switch to short stories, because I was writing a novel and I was struggling and struggling and struggling. And aside from the fact that my writing wasn't very good at the start, I was also struggling because I didn't understand the world,
Mm,
and I didn't understand how it worked. Umberto Eco, who wrote historical fiction, but still needed to do, for whom world building was essential, said that we must create constraints in order to invent freely. I needed my constraints so I could invent freely in the world, and so characters could grow and make sense in that context. Um, yeah. So you do, I agree, you absolutely have to do quite a lot of world building first, but you don't want to fall you don't want to develop world building disease where
mm.
you build and build and build and build and build and never write a story. Because I run into writers, often at I run world building workshops every now and again, and I often run into writers in world building workshops who that's all they do, and they've done it for years and years. And I'm like, it might be time. It might be time to put a story in this world that you spent a decade on.
You might know your world well enough. Let's do the characters now.
And the thing is, you might not even, once you put a character in context, you suddenly understand the world better
Mm.
and more clearly, and it's kind of iterative. So like, I mean, I've built the world, but every time I write a story or a novel, I I flesh out different parts at the same time and understand it that little bit better.
How do you go about your character building, especially in terms of the Escher man?
For the Escher Man and character, well, I have kind of like most writers, I was just guessing at
Mm,
the start. And we're always guessing still now. We're kind of fumbling around, um, and, and for the most part, discovering through trial and error how everything works. I do try to do for character, I do try to do character sheets. So the thing I have above my desk just here, the main thing that I focus on, not the main thing, but something that's clearly essential is character. So I have a character's their name, their physical description, uh, their the way of speaking, their body language, their backstory, their motivation, a secret. They
mm.
might have a page. If it's a minor character, they might have half a page. Major characters might have 2 or 3 pages. And once I understand, again, like world building, this can be iterative. So you'll be, as you're writing the novel, you'll also discover more things about your character. But if you have a character in a scene and you understand how they think and how they talk and what they want, motivation is super important. Kurt Vonnegut said Kurt Vonnegut wrote Slaughterhouse-Five, which is a great novel. Said that have your characters want something, even if it is only a glass of water. Give them motivation. So, but if you know all that about your character, then they will kind of take on a life of their own in scenes, and they will start to talk and they'll start to interact, and then you'll be like, oh, okay. And I think knowing a character makes your writing task a lot easier. So I think that's the main way I try to do it, novel to novel, story to story. I don't always start immediately with the character sheet. I might write some scenes, I might write the plot, like the story that I'm kind of thinking about, but then I'll go back.
Yeah.
The fundamental, foundational um, part of the craft is developing that character.
What inspired the Escher man?
So it's Escher Man, not Escher.
Escher man,
It's
sorry.
Escher after the artist Escher, who did
Okay.
those fantastical, weird, surrealist pictures of people like walking up infinite staircases and objects that have multiple sides and they're all optical illusions. What inspired it was an obsession. Oh, I mean, again, you never know. It's in a way, sometimes, in some ways, all your answers as a writer are all the same. It's like either I don't know where it came from, and I don't know how I do it. But that's not quite true. Um, I was obsessed with memory, and continue to be obsessed with memory. In science fiction, it's super interesting, because you can play with memory using technology and so forth,
Yeah.
and looking at how memory works. But if you understand how memory, if you think about it, is kind of everything we are.
Definitely.
All of our loves and experiences and our fears, and they're all driven by memory, and they're all built up on the top of memory. And if you think about someone without a memory, say with Alzheimer's, that's quite a tragic thing.
Mm.
And it almost feels like they're an empty vessel in a way. And so if that's true, then memory is kind of a metaphor for the soul, I suppose. And then in turn, one of the things I like about cyberpunk in particular, but also science fiction, is you can look at the way technology changes us, or social structures changes and sometimes dehumanizes. So if you have something that can play with memory, delete memory, give you false memories, edit memories, you're really in a way playing with the human spirit, I suppose. So, and then I did an enormous amount of research into memory and read all these books, and it is such a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, and then so the protagonist is someone who is suffered all these memory wipes, and has received all these false memories, and is trying to retain a sense of the self, trying to find an illusion of himself. So a reviewer just said, I think it was literally today I read a review where the reviewer said the story is about the main character, whose name is Endel. The story is about Endel trying to find his soul. And I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool line.
It's, and it's so like stands out as well as like, yeah, your our memories and everything sort of really guide us how we go on in the future as well. So, and the lessons that we try and help others to know as well. So it's a perfect sort of line, and a really sort of important story to sort of deal with as well. And that's having it in a cyberpunk world is sort of love the idea of technology and what could happen with it as well.
Yeah, Cyberpunk's got some really useful tropes, if you will, or that you can use, and it's got a lot of, um, I guess, tools in the Cyberpunk toolbox as a
Mm.
writer that allow you to explore some really cool philosophical issues, even as well as trying to write something that's immersive and fast paced. It's that trick of trying to marry the two.
And sort of and that's what gets readers like wanting to read it as well and continue reading it and hoping for the next books as well.
Hmm.
Did you have a favorite moment to write in the book? A particular scene?
I do love a good action scene. I
Yeah.
mean, we've just been talking about philosophy and the soul, but I do
Jump.
love a good action scene.
Yeah.
I always enjoy writing them, but my favorite in the book, probably two. There's a savage, savage twist about two-thirds of the way through the book, and I found that very satisfying because you've got to set it up. It's got to be earned. You've got to foreshadow it a bit, and the reader's got to go, "Whoa!" So I really love the twist. But the ending, I think, it's a really. I don't want to spoil anything, but it was a very, very tough book to write an ending for. Even to say the reasons, it would be kind of spoilery. But it took me quite a few years, and then when I figured out the ending, I just was extremely happy with it. I really think it brings everything together that the book was talking about, I think.
Definitely don't want to give spoilers for
Yeah.
anyone. Which of the characters do you relate to the most and why? Could be a bit hard. Because I do know.
It's hard because they're pretty violent people. Uh, Pretty violent people or who also have been suffering this kind of
Mm,
almost psychological warfare with all the memory manipulation. I don't think I don't know if I can relate to them necessarily, but I can understand them
yeah.
and like them, and even in some cases really love them. Um, and I suppose that goes back to your earlier question about character. If you, the author, can understand it, but if also the reader can understand, you don't need to. There's this thing sometimes with writing advice about making characters say relatable or likable. I don't
Yeah.
know if that's true. Maybe if you're writing a cozy fantasy, sure, but I think it's not making them necessarily likable. It's making them understandable.
Yeah.
And understanding that why they do what they do, and having perhaps some empathy with them for things that they've gone through, and understanding that it might be trauma or whatever it might be, and that it has informed their decision making.
Mm.
So I don't know if I can relate. I'm trying to think of even minor characters, so I'm struggling a bit, but I'm sure after the interview I'll think of one. But I think for the most part, I think I just understand the characters and I kind of care about them. Um, I definitely care about them. So it hurts sometimes for to do the things that I have to do to them.
Yeah. I don't always have to like a character, but if I like sort of understand what they're doing, I've had some of my favorite character ones are the typical like morally grey characters as well.
Mm.
Like that's fine. I understand what you're doing though.
I do. I look. There are some side characters that people like and even love.
Mm,
Don't get me wrong. You got to have a couple of people that you know, and you can do that in different ways. Like I think having a sense of humor or a really weird or outrageous character is cool as well. But yeah, I'm with you. I do like that. I am, and it's good that I write cyberpunk, but I am kind of addicted to the morally grey. I would say
yeah.
that would be true.
How has writing and publishing books changed the way you see yourself?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. That I kind of, as I said, I did have a previous career in a previous life, I suppose, and so I felt that I knew myself um, quite well. I thought had a high like self-awareness, if you will. But writing's interesting because whether you want to or not, you end up dredging up a lot of stuff from your
Yeah.
past, and you end up being forced to think about your choices you've made and why you go about things and what matters to you. Because when you're writing, you are writing from the deepest place in a way. Even if you're not writing your own story, and you shouldn't be. You know, I'm not talking about memoir, but whatever the story you write, certainly from my perspective, and I know a lot of writers I'm friends with, they're writing something they're tearing out a piece of their soul and they're putting it on the page. They're pouring their heart into it. They're pouring their mind into it. So inevitably, you learn about yourself. You kind of have to because you have to be extraordinarily passionate. I would hope you would have to be extraordinarily passionate about something to write a bloody novel.
Yeah.
That's torturous.
The amount of time and effort it takes to write as well.
Exactly. So I would say, but I don't know if I could give you a specific example, but I
Mm,
do think writing forces you to confront the self and the decisions you've made and the things you care about. Um, and sometimes question it and sometimes lean into it as well, I suppose. Um, yeah. But I think hopefully the problem, I don't know, this is also a tough question because hopefully it makes you a more self-aware person.
Yeah.
And at the same time, when you're a writer, you're in your own head all the time and you're alone a lot. That's not a
Mm.
healthy place to be.
No.
So you can sometimes reality can warp a little bit
Yeah.
because you're in your office, you're in your writing area. Like this, I just came back from where was I? Supernova in Brisbane. So for your viewers, Supernova is like the biggest pop cultural convention in the country. So I'm by myself. Then I go to Supernova and I talk to people
Yeah.
8 hours a day.
And sometimes you're on a panel as well.
Yeah, yeah. I was on
Answering
2 panels.
questions.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so sorry, I'm giving us kind of a vague and roundabout answer. So I think at best it does force you to know yourself better.
Mm.
But at worst, you can go down into the rabbit hole of your own brain, and that's maybe not the healthiest thing. So I do think you need balance there as well.
You do need a time away from your writing area as well, just to sort of
You do. I
um,
think you do. I think
mm,
you need to, whether it's time away mentally in the imagination in literature that you're reading, but you're absolutely right. Traveling, getting out sometimes, whether it's a little bit with exercise or a lot by getting away, I think that's really important.
are there any books or authors that has inspired your writing?
Um, like a little bit. I mean, I like Dashiell. This is a very old. This is like 100 years old. How old is this? It's 90 years old. This literature. So this hard-boiled detective stories of Dashiell Hammett, the Maltese Falcon and Red Harvest and stuff. His prose is exquisite and so sharp, so elegant, and he has these dense, seemingly straightforward sentences that yet contain so much. So I do love that. I love Kazuo Ishiguro, who's one of the greatest living writers, I think, but I don't know if I can see him in my work necessarily, but he must be there somewhere if you love an author so much, I suppose.
Yeah.
Probably Philip K. Dick in a way, not with his prose, but maybe with um, the weirdness and the paranoia and the stuff that,
Mm.
I do try to blow people's minds every now and again, and that's sort of the Philip K. Dick thing. Maybe Le Guin in a way because she was just so good at writing about social issues, you know. Maybe one of the greatest. So probably lots, I think, but it's also difficult because to at some point you do develop your own voice.
Yeah.
You will hope anyway.
And just make stand out from all the other books as well. You sort of do need to have your own voice.
You do. Unless of course the reader just wants to read the same thing over and over.
I think that would get a bit tiring after a while.
Yeah. Um, but those authors are all good ones.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't have to. Yeah, there's some good examples. Yeah.
What advice would you give to a writer working on their first book?
Ha. Uh, there's a couple of things are important
Mm.
when you start out, but through your whole career. One is you have to become um, you have to accept rejection as kind of a default.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not being cruel, but it's such a competitive business,
Mm.
and you need to develop a thick skin. It hurts, still hurts me when I get rejected, and I still do for my short stories. Um, but you need to have a high pain threshold.
Yeah.
And I think having a high pain threshold for rejection and unkind reviews.
They're out there.
They're out there, and just in industry, when people aren't being unkind, they're utterly indifferent. So
Yeah.
just agents who don't respond or editors who never get back, there's a lot of that where you, the author, are professional all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I try to be and try to hit my deadlines and respond to every email I get, but you're not treated with the same courtesy. So expect that. Develop a high pain threshold. But the best advice I can give you is write as much as you can and read as much as you can. They're the two golden rules. And treat reading as part of your job.
Mm.
Read the genres you love, but read outside your genre. I write science fiction, but I read a lot of fiction outside it. It might not just fantasy or horror, but crime, literary fiction, poetry, non-fiction. All of that can inform your work. Write as much as you can and read as much as you can. And they're the best teachers you'll have.
You sort of always learn different things and everything if you keep reading as well, and also talking to people as well helps them immensely. I
Mm.
think one of the best things I had heard you say when at a supernova was when you're writing, like your first draft is like a pancake or something goes straight in the bin.
My first drafts are pretty bad. I'm just at the moment actually just below the screen in front of me. I've got uh uh uh, uh geez, I'm a writer and I don't have a word for it. This is embarrassing. Whatever it is, what's this thing that holds bits of paper up? It's gone out of my head. What's this? It holds and it sits on your desk.
Uh, yeah, I know what it. I know. I can't remember what the word.
How can I not know that word? Anyway, this is just sitting down here in front of the screen. Is a draft I'm editing for the next novel. And I'm just going through it now, and it's appalling. Oh, I just kind of hate myself a little more every day because I just read what I wrote here, and I'm like, oh, God. But I'm just getting through it now. So yeah, the first draft is, um, yeah. Some people write really clean first drafts, but I'm not one of them.
Do you, a couple of fun questions now. Do you listen to music while you write?
Yeah, I listen to the theme so not music with any lyrics. I'll
Yeah.
pick a set of work that'll be like, will give the vibe or the tone of the words in a way, and it'll normally be like a soundtrack to a movie or something without lyrics.
Yeah.
And so at the moment I'm listening to I'm right I'm just looking it up. I'm listening to two songs back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. One is it's Adagio in D minor, but it was used in the Sunshine. You know the movie Sunshine? It was
Yes.
kind of
Yeah. That's a good one.
yeah. So I listened to that over and over. That's 25 minutes long. And there's also Club to Death, which is in the Matrix soundtrack.
Oh, yes.
Um, and so they just fit what I'm trying to do at the moment. And so that's all I listen to while I write. The next book, it'll be something else again, and then something else again. Um, Tends to help me focus most of the time. Tends to help me get in the zone. And writers will take anything we can get.
Yes. Just not listen to anything with lyrics because I have a feeling I would sing along if I was
Oh,
doing
and the
or
words,
go
because you're
into
trying
it.
to write words and you're hearing words go in your
Yeah,
ear,
that
and
wouldn't
I
work.
would just be typing what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And do you have a favorite writing snack or drink?
I don't really snack and eat. I am going to have a glass of wine after this interview, but really for writing, probably boring like water.
I think it's a fair answer though. You still you need to hydrate.
Yeah, I kind of hyper focus when I write. I
Yeah.
don't really do anything but put the music on and just knuckle down and try to write and not be interrupted.
And my final question is, who has been the biggest supporter of your writing?
Oh, I mean, my family have been the biggest supporters. My wife and my sons, they've been in their own way. I mean, I think with a lot of supporting writers is just tolerating their mental states, which can sometimes be mercurial.
Mm.
But yeah, it's a tough gig. It's a tough gig financially, and it can be a tough gig psychologically, but it's also an awesome gig. It's a fantastic thing to be able to write as as your day job.
Mm.
But they've been hugely supportive, yeah.
It's always good to have family who support and sort of understand that when you need to be in your writing zone as well.
Well, then I do have a young son, so I don't quite always understand. Sometimes they just burst into the room and attack me with swords or whatever, but that's fine.
Yeah, they come in, kids always come in at the weirdest times or about random things as well.
Yeah, exactly.